Hi everyone! This video tutorial is for the Bumble Bee Embroidery kit from Poppyseed Creative. If you haven't purchased one of the embroidery kits and you'd like to do so, I will put the link to my online store in the description below. These kits are perfect for beginners who want to learn how to embroider and need a helping hand. In this video, I'll be showing you everything that comes with the Bumble Bee Embroidery kit, the basic stitches that you'll need, and I'll also be including some tips and tricks throughout the video. So the kit comes with everything you need to complete this design. So you've got the 15cm embroidery hoop, white calico material, an instruction booklet, all the thread you need to complete your design, and if you flip the business card over, there's a needle on the back. So the first thing we're going to do when we get our kit is unscrew our hoop and separate it into two pieces. Next, we're going to get our white calico material, open it up, and make sure it's centered around the bottom of that hoop. Next, we're going to get that top piece of our hoop and place it over the top like that. Now don't worry about this creasing because as we tighten the hoop, it will tighten the material. So next we're going to lift that up, making sure the bottom of the hoop doesn't fall out, and we're going to tighten our embroidery hoop, not all of the way, just about halfway. Next we're going to go around and tighten all the fabric that's in that hoop, making sure to go all the way around so that the material doesn't become warped in the hoop. Once that's reasonably tight, we're going to go and tighten the rest of that embroidery hoop and then go around again and make sure that material is nice and tight in the embroidery hoop, because the tighter the material is in the hoop, the easier it will be to sew your design. Once your material is in the hoop, we're going to pop that to the side and get out our instructions. Now make sure you read all of the tips and starting your project before beginning this. Now we're going to flip to the back page where the template is. So we're going to flip our hoop over and see where we place it over our design, we can see straight through. Make sure your hoop is nice and centered with the design. Then holding that in place, we're going to get a blunt pencil and we're going to trace the design. Once you're happy with your design, we're going to unscrew our material from our hoop and flip the material over so the design is now on the front. Making sure our design is centered and then putting the front of the hoop on. Again, tightening halfway, pulling gently all around to make sure that the material is nice and tight, tightening the top again, and then pulling everything around. Make sure that as you're pulling, you're not warping your design. Once your design's all ready to go, we're going to get our black thread and we're going to start using satin stitch to fill in all of his body and his head. So you're going to cut a length of thread between 30 and 50 centimeters. Any longer than this and it can be a bit difficult to manage the thread. Next we're going to remove our needle from our holder. Now the biggest tip I have for threading embroidery thread, instead of twisting it and making it as small as possible, you want to flatten it out to fit through that hole. I recommend using a sharp pair of scissors to cut a nice straight edge, wetting the end just slightly, pinching it between your fingers, and then that should go through really easily. If it only comes through a little bit, you can use your nail to pull the rest of it through. You want to make sure you're leaving a tail of about 3 to 4 inches as well, just so that it doesn't unravel from your needle. The first stitch we're going to learn is satin stitch. Now satin stitch is used for filling in areas. So we're going to start from the very bottom where the bee stinger would be. Now when you're starting with a new piece of thread, always come up, never go down. So we're going to start right in the middle for this satin stitch, a little bit over that pencil line as well so that we won't see it once our design is finished. Pulling that needle up, and then we're going to make sure to leave again about 2 or 3 inches worth of tail at the back, and we're going to hold on to that as we do the next few stitches. The reason that we're doing that is once we finish stitching this area, we're going to use this tail and the end of this tail to create a knot at the back so it'll join those two pieces together and hold them in place. Now if you're finding that this bottom bit of tail is becoming too much of a nuisance, you can also put several knots in the back and then pull it nice and tight. Now for satin stitch, we're going to make sure we're going in a straight line. So going right up just into that line and then pulling that through, making sure our cord isn't twisted. Now the reason we're starting in the middle instead of starting from the edge is now we can fill one section in knowing that it's nice and straight and the other section in starting from a straight edge as well. If we started from one edge and worked our way over time our thread might become slanted. So again, coming up just next to where we did initially, I always find that the biggest tip I have for satin stitch is try to only leave one piece of white thread in between each of our stitches. That way there won't be any white sections visible through the black thread. And then again, going down just next to where we went down before. Now we're going to continue this pattern, but don't worry about making it super neat along the lines. You can go a little bit off kilter, like that one. See how I've made it a little bit longer than the rest of them? Don't worry too much about going up and down these lines, because the less in line they are, the more fuzzy the bee is going to look. So continue filling out this section, and then once you're done there, move over to the other section of that side. Now once that section's filled in, we're going to flip our thread over and tie this section off. For a normal knot, we'd go one under and then pull. For this one, we're going to go one under again, and then pull. Then we're doing a double knot, but we're going twice over. So under again, nice and tight. That way the thread is never going to come loose. And then we're just going to cut off those extra pieces of thread. So that is our first section with satin stitch done. See how it's not completely even? That is completely okay for this piece, because again, the more uneven it is, the fluffier the bee is going to look. Obviously the next color we're going to get is yellow. So same thing, making sure to unravel right in the middle. And then we're going to cut a 30 to 50 centimeter piece. For these sections of the bee, I wouldn't recommend cutting more than 30 centimeters just because we are tying them off at the end. Again, wetting the end of your thread slightly, flattening it, and then it should go through that needle nice and easily. Now what we're going to do is come up the same way we did before, but we're not going to come up next to the black. We're going to come up on this line here and then go down on the black. The reason that we do that is because if we came up from the black, the yellow might get tangled with the black, and we want our threads to stay nice and neat and not get tangled while they're working together. So again, leaving a 2 to 3 inch tail, coming up, and then for the first one we want it to go straight down the middle. Feel free to come down in the same hole that the black is using. That means that all your threads will be nice and aligned. And again, leaving one tiny bit of white thread in the middle, coming up and then down right on top of that black spot. Now we're going to do what we did before and just fill in this whole section. Now you're going to fill in the rest of the head and the body of the bee using this same satin stitch. So we're going to do all of the body and the middle of the bee, all the way up to these bits here of its little head. And then we're going to use the same black thread for the eyes using satin stitch as well. Just make sure you don't go from the head right over the eyes. This bit of the head and the eyes are two different sections that you want to use satin stitch for. So go ahead and fill in that middle section of the bee. Now once you've finished, your bee should look something like this. If you still have quite a bit of thread left on your needle, that's fine. You can keep using that, you don't have to tie off. However, if you only have maybe 10 centimeters left on your thread, tie off and start with a new piece of thread so you have plenty to work with. Next, we're still going to be using satin stitch and we're going to be filling his little legs, all these bits here. So the round bits on his legs we're going to be using satin stitch for. So there's several sections for this. There's 2 there, 2 there, 2 on each leg as we move down. You always want to come up through the middle of that first section that you're going to use satin stitch for, because that will give you that anchor line. So we're going to fill in these tiny little sections, giving him some nice fuzzy arms. Once you finish that first little arm, go ahead and fill in each of his arms with the same satin stitch. When moving from section to section, first of all, see how much thread you have left. Again, if you need to start with a new piece of thread, that's fine, just tie off with your older tail. However, if you have plenty of thread left like I do right now, instead of just jumping from this leg down to this leg, you want to thread your needle back through the body and then start by coming up out this way. The reason we do that is if we went straight down to the next leg, you would actually see that black thread right through the material, and we don't want to see that. So what you're going to do, put your needle through the middle of that leg there, see where you want to come out from, and then we're going to use all those little sections of tail that we've tied off to create a nice guard for that needle to thread down. So threading down the body of the bee, if we come up now, we won't be crossing over any pieces of that white material and you won't be able to see where the thread is going from one section to another. So once we've finished all the fuzzy little legs for our bee, we're gonna do his longer, thinner legs and his little feet. So what we're gonna do is just start where we finished. So I'm gonna be starting with this leg here because that was the last leg I did and my thread is there anyway. So what we're gonna be doing is backstitch. So we're gonna be coming up about 1/2 centimeter away from where we originally went down with our needle, pulling up like that, then going down at the bottom of his leg and pulling that through, making sure that our thread as well is nice and straight and not twisted. Next, we're gonna come up where we originally went down with that back stitch, coming up, and then about 1/2 centimeter down, going straight back down, and there's his little leg. Now we're gonna add some feet as well. So coming up about 4 mils away, and then back down the center. We only wanna do tiny, tiny little feet at the bottom. And then again, about 3-4 mils, coming up away, and then back in that same hole. And those are his little feet. So now we're gonna do the same thing for each of his legs here. Again, if you're running out of thread, make sure you start with a new piece of thread rather than trying to jump from section to section. Now I finished with that thread back down here, but I don't have another tail that I can tie it to that's very close. So I'm going to thread that up through the leg using those previous ties as guides. And we're gonna leave that piece of thread floating in the middle so that next time we finish a piece of thread on one of the other legs, we can do the same thing, bring it to the middle and then tie it, rather trying to tie 2 pieces of thread from opposite ends. Now once we finish doing all of his little legs, we're gonna also do his antenna in that same back stitch. For the bee's antenna, we're gonna do smaller sections than we did for the legs. So for the legs, it was 4 to 5 millimeters, but for the antenna, we're gonna do the sections of 3 millimeters. Now when we finish with one side of the antenna, we're gonna top the antenna with a French knot. So to do this, we're gonna bring the needle up a few threads away from where the top of the antenna is, and bring that all the way up. Then to do a French knot, needle in the right hand, extra thread from the needle in our left hand, we're gonna wrap around once, wrap around twice, and then we're gonna go back down through that hole we initially came up from. Extra thread in your left hand, pull the needle down through the material. If you find that it's not coming through the material, you can let go of the material in your left hand. This should loosen the wrap around the needle and it should go through a lot smoother. Making sure to still hold that thread afterwards though, as this will make sure that our French knot is nice and tight. And there is our first French knot for our bee. Now we're going to do the second antenna and the same French knot for the top. Now once the antenna are done, we're going to move over to our cream thread for the wings. So again, cutting it into about a 30 to 50 centimeter length, depending on how confident you are. Now to make the wings look a little bit more dainty than the rest of the body, we're going to divide this thread in half. So embroidery thread is made up of 6 individual strands. So we're going to grab 3 in each hand and divide this into 2 sections. Once your thread is divided, make sure it's nice and straight and not twisted. And then we're going to thread one of the sections through our needle. Now we're going to use stem stitch for the wings to make it a little bit more seamless. So we're going to come up about 3 to 4 millimeters away from the body, and we're going to leave a nice long tail, and then going back down towards the body. Now before we fully pull that thread all the way through, we're going to pull it to the side. See that loop there? We're pulling that to the side, and we're going to come up as close to the body as we can without coming up that original hole. Now we can let go of that loop with our thumb, but still holding on to that tail for our first stitch to make sure it doesn't pull all the way through. And then we're going to pull that thread all the way through so that's nice and tight. Now this stitch is going to make a bit more sense in a second. So now we're going to go down again about 3 or 4 millimeters away from where we initially went down. Again, putting our thumb to the side, holding onto that loop, pulling it down. Now we're going to come up where the end of that last stitch was, letting go of the loop, pulling up. Now as we continue to do this, it's going to look like a seamless line. So again, going down about 4 millimeters down, holding that loop on the side, and then coming back up from that last section, letting go of the loop, pulling nice and tight. And you can see there, it's starting to take its shape. So continue this and we're going to do the outline of both wings. Now when you're doing this stitch, make sure to keep the 3 to 4 millimeters for the gaps, because if you do one that's 10 millimeters and go all the way up here, the rest of the line isn't going to look as seamless. And because the wing has a lot of curves in it, we want to make this look as seamless as possible. Once the outlines of the wings are done, you can go and fill in all of the smaller details in the middle. You can do this using a mixture of stem stitch like we did for the outline of the wings, and backstitch like we did for the legs for the smaller sections. And for these sections, you can jump from section to section, as because the thread is lighter and a lot thinner than the black thread, you won't be able to see it running along the back. Now once your design is finished, it's time to back your hoop and put all of this material to the back. So the first thing we're going to do is flip it over, and we're going to cut this excess fabric off, and we're going to cut about 1 inch off all of these corners so that it's round all the way around your hoop. It doesn't have to be neat at all because this is all going to be put onto the back anyway. Now similarly to the wings, you're going to get a long piece of thread between 30 to 50 centimeters, and you're going to divide it in half, so you're working with 3 pieces of individual thread. It doesn't matter what color you use, as this will just be tying all the material to the back. However, it is preferable that you use one of the lighter colors, so I'm using the wing color for the backing. I use a folding technique for my backing so that it lies nice and flat. So what you're going to do is fold a piece in and just pinch that slightly there, and then fold that pinch to the right. Now you're going to take your needle with your thread, pull it through, and then we're going to tie that section together. Now working anti-clockwise, we're going to do the same thing all the way around. So pinch and flatten, and then needle through, coming up towards the center, making sure our tail doesn't get in the way, and then making sure that's tight all the way around. And then as we're working, these back sections will continue to become loose, so make sure you're holding your thread tight the whole way around. Once you reach the end of your backing, make sure that thread is nice and tight, and then use that other bit of tail to tie off this section. It doesn't matter if this back section is a little bit messy, because it's at the back, no one is going to see it. And that is the finished embroidery hoop. Thank you so much for watching everyone, and happy stitching!